The Source continues its look at back to school in Niagara. Let's shift back to elementary and secondary schools. Joining us now, MPP Niagara West, Sam Oosterhoff, who is also the Parliamentary Secretary to Minister of Education, Stephen Lecce. And Sam, earlier this week, we had on The Source Dr. David Hutchison from Brock University, who it's his opinion that the return to school was rushed. How would you answer that opinion from the viewpoint of the government?
Absolutely. So immediately after Ontario made the decision to remove students from the classroom back in March, which was the first province in Canada to do so, because we understood the importance of protecting the health and safety of our students, we commenced conversations with partners, including the Chief Medical Officer of Health, as well as our school boards and labor partners, to ensure that we were able to safely reopen this fall. Now, that being said, we also understood that it's very difficult, back in March and also even earlier this summer, to know what the circumstances were going to be when September rolled around. And that's why, as we engaged weekly, multiple times a week, and worked every day within the Ministry of Education to ensure that we had a plan that was endorsed by the Chief Medical Officer of Health and informed by the advice from sick kids and informed by Ontario's top doctors, that we were doing so in a collaborative way. And so I would say that we've been working on this since day one of the shutdown. And so we've been making every effort also to recognize that this is a living document, and we're going to be making changes as is fit, and also in response to feedback from our partners like school boards, labor partners, and families as well.
There was a lot of back and forth between the province and the labor unions with the teachers unions, and there was a lot of acrimony, certainly at the beginning stages of the announcement of this. Class sizes was a big sticking factor.
Well, we've been clear, as has the Chief Medical Officer of Health, that we're taking the best medical advice that we can find. This isn't my plan. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a disease control expert. Neither is the Premier or the Minister of Education. And that's why really we're going to the health experts, the ones who have been informing all of our decisions and making sure that we're basing our decisions on their advice. And that's really been key in this whole process. But there's a whole suite of options. I know that the one the unions always want to talk about is class sizes. We have seen class sizes mostly reduced across the province as a result of significant funding increases from both the province and working with our federal partners. But the reality is there's a whole suite of things that need to be looked at, things such as community transmission rates, ensuring that adequate sanitation is in place, things such as air quality. It's why we've invested $50 million towards HVAC, safety protocols that are in place around cohorting, around contact tracing, and of course masking. And so I think it's important that we don't boil this down to one factor. We recognize, of course, that we want to ensure as much as possible that students are able to maintain distancing, and that's why we have given boards access to their reserves. That's why we've given boards an additional $1.3 billion in funds this year in order to hire one-time staff to ensure that that distancing occurs. But I don't believe at the end of the day that one particular factor is going to be the determination. And that's, again, based off of the advice of the medical experts.
Sam, the first 2 days of this week, we've seen an uptick in COVID cases across the province. Monday, over 300, another 251 for Tuesday, and also some COVID cases reported at a number of schools and a number of different school boards. Is the government ready to deal with the situation if there is an outbreak in the schools, and what would the procedure be?
Yeah, there's a couple of different pieces there. So the first one, of course, is that very concerning to see these numbers increasing, and recognizing as well that these numbers are disproportionately in people under the age of 40. And so that's a very important piece in that, because we recognize that a lot of this is because of particular community transmission, things such as parties, group events. We're seeing weddings, bars, and restaurants. And so it's not that the transmission is being because of the schools reopening. That being said, we've said that we will take action very quickly in situations where that might mean there are hotspots, and we've seen that very much concentrated in this case in Ottawa, Peel, and Toronto. And so I believe, again, that we're going to be following that advice of the medical experts when it comes down to protecting the health and safety of students, but we won't hesitate to shut down schools if that becomes apparent that the need is there.
Sam, there's hints right now that later this week, Premier Ford will be announcing that he will not go into a full provincial lockdown if a second wave of COVID hits, but instead look at it on a region by region basis. Is Stephen Lecce thinking of the same region by region basis, or I guess board by board basis, when it comes to schools?
Right. Well, I don't think anybody wants to go back to what we saw this spring. The shutdown obviously had huge amount of impacts for people. I always say, the impacts of COVID have gone beyond just the health impacts. We've seen the societal, the economic impacts, the impacts on families. And so obviously we want to try to avoid that, but we recognize first and foremost the health and safety of students and of our citizens. And so we've said we will not hesitate to shut down schools or whole school boards. That being said, there are 72 school boards in the province. And again, it's a living document because there are differences between Kenora, there's differences between Ottawa and Niagara and Waterloo and Windsor. And we recognize that we have to be flexible. We have to work with our partners and take the on-the-ground advice as it comes. So we won't hesitate to do that if it's justified. But I don't think we'll see an entire provincial shutdown right away.
Sam Oosterhoff, MPP for Niagara West, thank you for joining us today on The Source.